It seems like get out the vote efforts are going on everywhere you turn these days, with a slew of celebrities, corporations, nonprofits urging people to get to the polls through a barrage of mailings, texts, and robocalls. Many have been targeting younger voters, with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others gaining a lot of attention for their efforts to get gamers involved in this year's election. But vulnerable populations are in need of extra attention too, especially in the middle of a worsening pandemic. That's why the Pine Street Inn has been working harder than ever for their homeless guests to fight misinformation about who can and can't vote and help people register and cast their ballots if they want to take part. I'm joined now by the president and executive director of the Pine Street Inn, Lyndia Downie. Lyndia, it's great to see you as always.
Thank you.
You know, I have to say I'm embarrassed. When I was reading Adrian Walker's column in the Globe with you about this, I had many misconceptions too. Let's go down them for a second. People do not need a permanent address to be able to register and vote. Is that correct?
Well, in Massachusetts, if you're homeless, you can use a shelter as a permanent address. And in fact, many people get their mail at one of our shelters. And so that's the address we would register people at.
And so if someone is not connected to a shelter, is a homeless person who, for whatever reason, either by choice or fear of coronavirus, is essentially living on the streets, are they disenfranchised?
Well, I'll be honest, I wouldn't rule it out. I might put on the address line, staying on the corner of Tremont and, Shaman Ave. I would try it. I think certainly the Boston Election Department has been quite flexible when we've run into cases that may not be straightforward in terms of letting people register.
Well, you anticipated my next question. Are election authorities sympathetic to the special situation of people who are homeless when it comes to their desire to vote?
I would say yes. I mean, of course, most of our experience has been in Boston, which is where our shelters are. And so when we call Boston Election Department with a question, they've typically been very helpful. We've made a few calls to the Secretary of State's office. Again, sometimes we have just a tricky case for people, or it's a little bit extenuating. And we've always gotten an answer, and they've been very helpful.
Why does this matter? You do this every day of your life. To say I'm on the periphery is being kind at best to myself, but there's so many issues that a homeless person or a homeless family has to deal with. When I read a quote or two in Adrian's column, it was really moving to hear how much it meant to someone who is homeless dealing with that to cast their vote. Can you flesh that out a little bit?
I think that you're right that when you become homeless, just getting through the day is difficult. There is very little that's in your control. You are at the mercy, unfortunately, of people like us who, wake you up at a certain time, tell you what time lunch is served, tell you what time dinner will be. It's challenging. And, we're our own system that needs work, frankly. But then you've got where do I get my ID? How do I apply for benefits? If I'm going to go look for a job, where do I start? If I don't have a cell phone. So you're absolutely right that life is very, very complicated when you become homeless. But I will say that my experience, and we've been doing voter registration a long time, is that many of our guests connect the dots between policy and voting. They want to vote. They see it as their civic duty. They are often under the assumption that they can't vote because they're homeless, or they can't vote because they've been in jail, which is neither of which is true. So sometimes there's a bit of you can do this. But people take a lot of pride in it, frankly. They do see it as often their civic duty, and they don't lose that when they become homeless.
It's great to hear. Lyndia, I looked up today last time you were here, and I had forgotten you were here literally just days after the lockdown started in Massachusetts, and we talked about what the spring and summer was going to look like. You're facing the winter where everybody says it's going to be worse. An eviction moratorium has expired. The governor has provided a lot of money. Some people think it's a good start. Others think there's a long way to go. No relief from the federal government. I know you've had to turn away people for, I think, the first time. What does this winter look like at the Pine Street Inn?
Well, of course we're worried. It's this spring has been, full of, I think, anxiety and worry for the guests and especially our frontline staff. We know heading into the winter, because we reduced the numbers in shelter across the state, not just in Boston, that we've got reduced capacity with the cold weather coming and a moratorium that's expiring. And we're working very closely with the city who has, I think, identified some other sites for some temporary winter beds. The state is working through MEMA to also identify facilities statewide to at least get us through the cold winter. But the more people obviously that come in, the higher the risk of increased COVID positive rate is going to be. So there's no easy answers on this one, Jim. I think we're all going to do the best we can. We're going to work closely with our city and state partners, but it's going to be a challenge.
One last thing before you go is many people who celebrate the wonderful work that you and your colleagues do often focus on one day in particular, and they shouldn't, but they do, namely Thanksgiving. But for those who are concerned, while there won't be volunteers, which is often what gets it into the media, Thanksgiving will go on for your guests, correct?
Yes, we will. Absolutely. We'll be having our turkeys. We will be having, Thanksgiving Day meal. It's just, we normally do family style. Normally the volunteers, the guests don't have to wait in line for Thanksgiving. People serve them. It's really a day to be grateful for what we have. And so this will be different. We'll have 2 people to a table. It'll be a much slower pace, frankly, but given the winter and what we're heading into, both with COVID, and just the time we're in, we don't think it's safe to bring volunteers back in. Hopefully next year, but it will be different. It will be much more subdued, much quieter, but still a day to celebrate, I hope.
Well, we're grateful for you too, Lyndia Downie. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Jim.
For more on the Pine Street Inn's great work, visit them online at pinestreetin.org.